take the staff together with you to Mitzrayim. So Moses goes on the donkey. Now Rashi says that on the verse 20, it says, Ha-chamor, the donkey. When he says Moses loaded his family up in the car for the trip, right? He put them on the donkey. So it doesn't say he put them on a donkey. He put them on ha-chamor. He put them on the donkey. So Rashi says, he says that this is not no ordinary donkey. This is a very special vintage donkey model. It's the same donkey that Abraham originally took his son Isaac to be sacrificed on. We also speak about the donkey that Abraham used for transportation. It was that donkey. It's also a donkey that will take, that it says when Mashiach comes, Mashiach will come as a poor man, actually, interestingly, on a donkey, riding on a donkey to save the Jewish people. And this is the same mode of transportation. This is the same donkey, this vintage vehicle, this vintage chamor, that's being acknowledged as a donkey that Abraham took, Mashiach will take, and here Moses is taking that to go and save the Jewish people. And take your staff and go. Rashi says, obviously, he first took his staff and then went, even though the verse says he first went and then took his staff, which would make no sense. You first pack up your packages and then you go. Rashi says verses are sometimes kind of written out of order, but obviously you have to understand the meaning that he packed his staff, took his staff, and then he went. Verse 21. God says to Moshe, when you go back to Egypt, he's telling him the plan of action, right? You're going to see all these miracles that I'm placing in the staff, right? Because you're taking the staff. I am already like this magical staff has in it the potential and the ability to perform all these miracles. It's fully loaded. It's loaded with all the abilities. This is kind of the way Rashi explains it. But I see some lefnei Pharaoh, and you'll do the miracles that you will do in front of Pharaoh that are not the miracles that you did, because the miracles that God told him in yesterday's Chumash of turning it into a snake and then picking it up, and which will also be by Pharaoh, but which also sticking his hand in his shirt and turning white, and those things, those are for the Jews. But there'll also be more miracles, and that in addition to the miracles that you did, obviously, that Moses is going to perform with the staff in front of Pharaoh. And you should know that Pharaoh is not going to agree to send you. It's not going to be an easy mission, 1, 2, 3. I want you to know right now, he's going to say no. He's going to disagree. I guess in a way, God was telling Moshe, you know, it's not going to go so smooth. I'm just giving you a heads up now. I'm going to strengthen his heart. He will not listen and he will not send the Jewish people out with you. So this is the plan. Don't get caught off guard. I guess when it seems to go haywire, when the plan ends up failing, you should know this is all predestined. This is the plan. Don't think we're off the plan, but we are on the plan. Just the hiccup is not a hiccup. It's actually part of the plan. Martel Pare, verse 22, and you'll say to Pharaoh, Koy Amar Hashem, so says Hashem. This is what I want you to tell him when you get there. B'ni b'chayri Yisrael, interesting verse that's famously quoted. And I'll share with you what Rashi says in this. He says, my firstborn, my son, my firstborn son, the Jewish people Yisrael, that in the conversation with Pharaoh, tell Pharaoh, referring to the Jews as they are God's firstborn son. Rashi says, first of all, so Pharaoh's going to deny. I just told you, Pharaoh's going to say, no, I'm not sending them. You stand up to him. You tell him very strong. You say, the Jewish people are God's firstborn son. What does it mean? It's interesting words, that they're my firstborn son. So, Rashi says, firstborn is kind of an idea more than actually firstborn in time. The firstborn son was always like prestigious, royalty, power, special, a unique bond between him and his parents. So the Jewish people are not the firstborn in time, so to say, but it's reflecting the idea of a firstborn, that they're very special in Hashem's eyes. That's one way to understand why God is telling Moses to refer to the Jews, to Pharaoh, as their God's firstborn son. Another interesting reason, Rashi was a very interesting reason, the second one, is like, do you remember back in history, not too long ago, when Isaac had 2 sons? And who was the firstborn son? The firstborn son was not Yaakov, was Esav. And the firstborn rights, Yaakov purchased it, but it was contested. Where do we find that God is admitting or agreeing where do we see that Hashem's agreeing with the Jewish people that they kept that unique position in their being the firstborn son? And Rashi says this is here where God himself is agreeing, admitting to the debate here between Yaakov and Esav, that yes, Yaakov, that's why, again, why is he referring to the Jewish people in that unique expression of firstborn son? interestingly, to say that although it's debated, I'm agreeing, right? So Esav will say, you're not the firstborn son, I'm the firstborn son. God should say, you should know that I'm siding with the party that does say that the Jewish people, that Yaakov gets the rights to be the firstborn son. Two interesting ideas in Rashi in explaining how to understand the verse that God is referring to the Jews as his firstborn son. Verse 23. And say to Pharaoh, this is what you should say, Shlachas b'ni, send my son. The Jewish people are my firstborn son. Pharaoh send my sons out of Egypt. I'm telling you how to deal with my children. And they will serve me. The Jewish will serve. Right? We're going to go serve God. But to mine the shalchai, and he will not send you. He's going to disagree. This is what's going to happen. I'm telling you, God says it's going to happen. I'm sorry, and tell him if you don't send them, I'm warning you, Pharaoh. I will kill your firstborn son. So basically, God's saying, you're holding back my firstborn son. You start up, you don't listen to me. Your punishment is going to be, I'm going to kill your firstborn son. Now, where does this actually happen? The answer is yes, God will end up killing. We all know that the 10th plague was that all the firstborns in Egypt got killed. So it was exactly what God warned him. He said, you don't let my firstborn son go, Pharaoh, I'm going to kill your firstborn son. Now, Rashi addresses this very interesting. He says, look, why doesn't God warn Pharaoh about, in order? There's going to be blood, there's going to be frogs. Why does God jump right away to the worst punishment, the final one? Why does God skip over all the 9 plagues? Why does God bring up to Pharaoh the final plague? And he says something very interesting, the difference between human beings and when Hashem needs to warn another person. A person never shows his cards. And a human being never shows all his cards. So when he threatens someone, he doesn't want the person to figure out, the plan that he's going to do. So like in a war, like in an army, I'm imagining it's similar to that. Like if there's an army attacking another army, they're not going to say, here I am, I'm coming to you here, this is how I'm attacking you. You're not going to spill the beans. You're not going to say where you're coming from. Right? You're not going to say where you're going because the person can get away. So you actually don't give the full, you just say, I'm warning you, but you don't say what I'm going to do. Don't start up with me, whatever, and then you attack without the person knowing, because otherwise the guy can get out. God's the opposite. You can't get away from Hashem. And therefore, God will tell you the full scope of the punishment your person's going to get, and then with the notion that hopefully the person will change path, because God really doesn't want the person to sin, but he has no problem divulging what he will do. So God will actually, I just find this very interesting, because remember when we were learning in the Chumash, a lot of threats that Hashem made for not keeping the mitzvahs, and they're very scary. And maybe a way to understand it is God is telling you the worst consequences because he doesn't want you to do. So in other words, he doesn't want to do those consequences and he's hoping not to, but he's going to tell you the worst consequences to get you to do what's right. Even though human beings don't act like that, the reason human beings don't act like that and say the worst consequences because they actually don't want the other side to get away. But God's not afraid of people getting away. He doesn't care to tell them the worst consequences, and he actually hopes that the person will change his track in order to do tshuva and come back. And that is a little bit very interesting about how Hashem warns someone. So God tells Pharaoh the warning of the worst, of the last hardest plague, and it makes sense because you're keeping my firstborn son in plague. I'm going to punish your firstborn son. Very interesting. Verse 24. And a very interesting story for those of us that never study the Chumash like we're studying here inside. You probably don't know this story. You might very likely that you don't know this story. So listen to something new for many of you. And it was in the way. And they stopped at an inn. They were getting closer to Egypt, as Rashi says. They were almost there. Hashem, and the Lord met Moshe, who's going on God's mission to go to Egypt. And believe it or not, God wanted to kill him. Unbelievable. So God sending Moses on a mission to Pharaoh to save the Jewish people. And on the way, very interesting, God wants to kill Moshe. Rashi gives us the background to the story. What in the world is going on over here? So he says that Moses had a child, a second child, besides Gershon. He had another child, his name is Eliezer, who was born literally right before Moses was meant to go on his trip to Egypt, commanded by God. He's to travel all the way from the south in Midian, all the way north. Now, we all know that the Jews already were commanded to do Bris Milah. They had by Avram Avinu, Abraham got the commandment to do Bris Milah, and Moses had a dilemma. He didn't know what to do. He said, what should I do? God is telling me, go right away. The Jews are suffering. Go and save the Jewish people. I have a mission from God, a very important mission, go and save the Jewish people. God dictated to me what I should do. On the other hand, I have a commandment to do a bris milah to my son at 8 days old. Do I, now, if I do the circumcision while I'm traveling, literally do a circumcision, I had it on the road, that's literally dangerous. Who does that? Nobody gives a kid a circumcision and then travels in the desert on a donkey in the road with an 8-month-old, with an 8-day-old child that just had a bris milah. You could kill a kid. No, it's something that's dangerous. So do I wait in Midyan, give him the bris, wait a couple days, let him heal, and then go? But then I'm not going to save the Jews, which God told me to go. Or do I go? Do I not do the circumcision? Go to Egypt, get to Egypt, and then circumcise him there. What should I do? So Moses decided that he had this mission from God to go and save the Jewish people. God commanded him. He has to go. And he cannot circumcise his son. He actually pushed off the bris milah of his child. And as Rashi explains, the next part of the story, that Moses arrived at an inn, meaning the inn was very close to Egypt already. He's already not too much traveling left. I guess he traveled most of the Sinai Desert. Went from Midian, crossed through the Sinai Desert, and got to Egypt. He was before. I guess he's not there yet. He's right outside there. And at this point, it wasn't dangerous anymore to do the bris. There wasn't major traveling left. Now, what he did was, his problem, as Rashi explains, was that he should have done the bris right away. He should not push it off even for a second, for a minute. You got there, it's not dangerous anymore. Boom, put down don't even set up your tent. Right away, do the bris milah, do the circumcision. But Moses didn't. Moses started setting up his tent. So that's where kind of Moses' mistake was. Instead of doing the circumcision right away, I guess he was going to set up tent and then do the circumcision. And he shouldn't have done that. So what happens here in this story. And let me just explain Rashi, and then we'll do it inside. So angel dressed up like a snake and literally started swallowing Moses. He got up to where Moses' bris would be and then spit him out, and then swallowed him from the other side, from the feet, until his bris, till where the male organ is, and then spit him out. They kept on doing that back and forth. And his wife, Tzipporah, is watching the scene. His husband's being killed by a snake, but the snake doesn't actually eat him. The snake spits him out. And every time the snake stops right when he comes to the male organ, and she realized that there must be a message here, something going on. And she realized that it was a bris milah, the fact they didn't circumcise her son. So let's see inside, verse 24. They were in the way by Mullah, and they stopped at the inn. By Yifkasheu Hashem, and Hashem met up with them. The angel met up with them. Vivakesh HaMisei, and the angel wanted to kill him, as Rashi explains us how that happened. But Tigach Tzipporah, so Tzipporah realized from the way that the snake, which was an angel dressed up like a snake, kept on swallowing Moses until the male organ. What was the problem here? But Tigach Tzipporah Tsar, Tzipporah took a rock, a stone, a sharp stone. By Tichre says Arlas Bana, she cut the foreskin of her son. By Tigla Raglov, and she threw the foreskin at her husband's feet. By Taimar Kichasin Dam Matali, she tells the snake, "You're a murderer of my husband. You're trying to kill my bridegroom, my chatan, my bride. I mean my groom. Sorry, you're trying to kill my groom, and because of you, my groom almost died." Verse 26. Vayiraf mimenu. And then the snake released Moses after she did the circumcision, because it really was a spiritual reason that this was happening. It was Amra Chas and Dam in the Malas, and she said, my groom, my chatan, almost died of the blood because of the blood of circumcision. So interesting, very interesting story, what took place. I just what's the meaning here? What's the message here? To me, actually, there was a little bit of a meaning to the story. I'll tell you how I took it a little bit. A lot of times we have to mesh, especially in a rabbi position or so on, everyone in life, that we have to mesh the communal needs versus our own family needs, right? So sometimes, I deal with that all the time. Do I do homework with my kids, or do I learn, or do a funeral for someone? It's always conflicts between taking care of the family and taking care of the community, personally, and in everyone's lives. You all have that in your own lives. There is a conflict between the needs of your own family, even spiritually, versus needs of other people. Do you go and visit the sick, or do you take care of your family? And I think we see this a number of times in Torah. Maybe this is a message to be learned from here, is that you have to go on your mission, but you must, when your family needs you have to come right back. In other words, let's say the community needs you should go help. But the second you're able to, you have to come back and go back to taking care of your family and fulfilling your personal mitzvahs that Hashem gave you. And it's not an excuse to take care of the community to forget about your own personal needs. Anyway, that was a little bit of my own thoughts. I don't know if that's correct, but just sharing with you that personal message that I took from it. Vayemer Hashem al Aaron. And as Moses is already very close to Egypt, God reveals himself to Aaron, who's still been in Egypt the whole time, right? The brothers have not seen each other for a very long time, for 50 years. And Hashem says to Aaron, Lech likras Moshe, he says, Moses is coming, and Aaron, go meet up with Moses. Amidbara to the desert, Vayelech, and Aaron finds out, I guess they had good GPS, God tells him where to go. Vayelech ve'ivkashem b'har elikim, and he went and he met up with Moses on the mountain of God, Vayishak loi, and he kissed him. Yagid l'Moshe la'Aaron, and Moses tells Aaron, is called Divrei Hashem, all the words of God. So these are two holy brothers. God speaks to Aaron, God speaks to Moses, and Moses is sharing with Aaron everything that took place, everything he sent him, and the miracles that Hashem commanded him to do, that Hashem did for him, commanded to do. Moses tells Aaron everything that happened. So what do they do? So now Moses and Aaron go together. They're joint in this mission. And they gather together. It's called Ziknev and Yisrael, all the leaders and the elders of the Jewish people, right? So the great leadership of Jewish people. Aaron, and now Aaron is the speaker. Moses is the one with the handicap to speak, and Aaron is the speaker. So Aaron called Varim, so Aaron tells everybody else everything that God told Moshe. And he performed the signs for the eyes of the people. So now they tell them and they show the miracles. They show everybody what's going on, and everybody's convinced. Verse 31. Remember, Hashem said they'll believe you. And the nation believed, Vayishmu, and they heard that Hashem had remembered the Jewish people, and Hashem saw their affliction, their suffering, and they kneeled and they prostrated themselves, and they were convinced. And now Aaron and Moshe have to talk with the elders of the Jewish people. Now they're convinced and they're ready to join Moshe. However, we're going to continue to Shabbos' Chumash. We're going to see not so fast. They all chickened out. Because I could imagine that going to Pharaoh was it's not an easy thing. You have to have tremendous guts, confidence, not be afraid to enter the lion's den. Let's see what happens in verse 1. You're going to see that only Moses, they go, they do the miracles, everybody's in, but they're very fast, they're not in. Verse 1. Yachar, by Moshe v'Aaron, and afterwards, Moshe and Aaron said, they came to Pharaoh. And Moses and Aaron tell Pharaoh. Now, we have to do the Rashi before we say what Moses told Pharaoh. Rashi says, why doesn't it say Moses and Aaron and the elders came? Because they just got the elders and convinced them to join them. Why does it say right in the beginning of the verse that when they approach Pharaoh, it's only Moses and Aaron that's there? So Rashi says, what happened to the elders? He says, one by one, they chickened out, they slipped away until one guy left and the next guy left, like it made, you don't want to make a big commotion. Sorry, I got to go take care of the kids, whatever. Each of them disappeared. By time they got to the palace, there was nobody left. Only Moshe and Aaron. Why not? Rashi says they were afraid. This is like suicide that they were doing. Going to tell Pharaoh that he has to release the Jewish people was suicide. So very interesting. So they all chicken out, Moses and Aaron. Now Rashi says, what's the punishment to the elders? Everything we're seeing so far is you eat what you sow. You eat whatever it is that you give out there. So they chickened out from going to Pharaoh. They didn't have the courage. So when Mount Sinai is going to come and the Torah will be given, God will make certain locations where everybody could go to stand, how close you could stand. Back seats, who gets the back seats, front row seats, and who has to sit like all the way up, in the football stadium, you got to sit all the way back. So the elders should have been closer up. They should have had courtside seats to Mount Sinai, but because they weren't courtside when it came to Pharaoh, they lost the courtside seats at Mount Sinai. So they got, for their actions, they didn't have the courage to stand up when it was time. So also, they didn't get to have courtside seats when it came to Mount Sinai. Only Moses and Aaron did. Verse 2, so Pari said, Mi Hashem. Sorry, I have to go back to verse 1. I have to finish the verse. So they came to Pharaoh. They tell Pharaoh, Koy Amar Hashem, so says God. Elokei Yisrael, the God of the Jews. Shlach es ami. Send my nation, v'yachoyguli b'amidbar, and they'll sacrifice to me in the desert. Let them make a party. Right? The party, we want to have an event. We want to have a party for God in the desert. Send the people and let them go. What does Paris say? The first response, exactly as God predicted. God said it was going to happen. So Paris says, "Mi Hashem, who's God? That I should listen to him. Who is he? That I should listen to him? Vishlachas Yisrael to send the Jews. Lo yadati es Hashem. I don't know this God. It's not in my Rolodex. I don't know where'd you pick him up from? Who is this person that you're telling me to send? V'gam, it's Yisrael l'shavach, and nothing doing. I'm not sending the Jewish people. I don't know who this is. He's not in my. I don't have his phone number. I don't know who he is. I don't know who you're talking about." And we know he's going to find out very, very clearly who Hashem is, but I don't know who he is, and I'm not telling the Jews. So they said, "You don't know who he is? He's the God of the Jews, the ones that we believe in. Nikra Eleinu, he called to us, he appeared to us, told us, Ne'el Chana, and he said, we should go. And they're saying, let us go. We want to leave for 3 days. We want to break from our work that you're making us slave here, break from Egypt for 3 days, Midbar in the desert. We want to walk for 3 days in the desert, go on a little journey, Hashem, and offer sacrifices to God, Elikenu, our God. Because if not, it might happen that we will get struck with a plague or the sword. We might all end up dying. If we don't listen to what God wants us to do, we'll die. Now Rashi says that they didn't mean that they'll die. They mean that Pharaoh will die. But you don't tell that to the king to his face. This is where we see, even I don't know, maybe one of the locations where we see, you always have to give respect to the king, right? Even if you think, I guess this is good for our president now too. Even if you believe that the president is whatever, in your opinion, all these things, and there's nobody worse than Pharaoh, I guess, right? They still spoke with a very strong level of respect. They let him know what they thought, but even by saying, they basically said, we'll have a plague and we'll die, and they meant, he knew and they knew that they meant that Pharaoh will die if he doesn't let the Jewish people go. So they're talking with respect to this terrible person, talking with respect to him. So the king, so this is what they tell Pharaoh, basically, if you don't send us, you're gonna die. You have to let us go. God wants us to go on a 3-day vacation each way, I guess. We want a week vacation, 3 days there, 3 days back, and to serve Hashem. Verse 4, so the king of Egypt responds to them, Lama, Moshe v'Aaron, Moses and Aaron, what are you doing? Why? Why are you getting involved? Why are you disturbing the people from the work? What do you have to do with anything? Or why are you messing up the work? There's people here working. There's a mimais of the chulis of the Go to your own work. Go. What are you getting your nose involved in the business of Pharaoh and the Egyptian business over here? Go to the chulis of lechem. Go to your work. So Rashi says, Pharaoh is telling Moses, you're messing up my workforce. You're convincing these people that they deserve a vacation, that they deserve a break, that they shouldn't be working so hard. You are getting involved in destroying my system over here of work that's going on. Move away, step away, get away from here, Moses. Stop getting involved in something that's not for you. Go. Where should you go? Go to your own work. Rashi shares some very interesting information behind the scenes of what's going on over here. He says that the Levites, Moses and Aaron, were from the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi never got involved with the work. They were never taxed. They were tax exempt. They were exempt from the Egyptian workload that all the other Jewish people had. Without getting into why, I think if I remember correctly, the reason is because the way Pharaoh started the work was he made it a what's the word I want to use, like patriotic kind of work, and everybody got involved. And once everyone was so patriotic and doing what they can, Pharaoh said, okay, now don't stop. Now you have to keep on continuing. And the Levites never got involved because they were studying Torah. They were in yeshiva. They weren't involved in the work. They never got caught up in the workforce that was there. So Pharaoh was telling Moses and Aaron, you guys are on the tax exempt list. You're on the tax exempt list that you're not taxed to build. Go home, feed your kids, do whatever you do. But do not get involved and convince these people that they're deserving of a break. Now you're going to destroy their working. And Pharaoh says to Moses and Aaron, there's so many people. He says, look how many people we have working here. We know the Jews were like millions of, they were like 600,000 men. There was a major workforce that were being taxed. The nations of the land, there's so many. And you're going to convince them of their vacation time that they need. And it's going to cause tremendous financial loss to the Egyptian empire. You're going to cause tremendous damage. So Pari says, this is the deal. This is what we're going to do now. He commands the there's two kinds of people. Remember, there was the, what do we call it, the kapos and the Egyptian taskmasters. So the Egyptian taskmasters oversaw the management of the Jewish managers, taskmasters, who their job was to oversee the slavery of the Egypt, make sure everyone was doing their quota. So the Egyptian taskmasters would enforce the Jewish taskmasters under them to enforce the quota that needs to be done by the Jewish people. Now, they weren't like the kapos, as we were talking the other day. These people, maybe there were some very holy kapos. They were good people, but they ended up getting the beating because they were in the middle. So Paro commanded the Jewish manager, taskmaster, the Egyptians ones and the Jewish ones, and this is what he told them. Verse 7, Lo yisei sifun, la yisei teven. He says, no more, don't give them the stubble, whatever it is that they use, the kind of straw, the way they would make the bricks. How did the people make bricks in Egypt? I think Rashi tells us here, they would take this kind of like stubble or something, and then they would, I guess, mix it with water, and then they would dry it either in the sun, or they would even put it in a kiln, in a kind of a fire, an oven, in order to harden, and that became the bricks that they would use to build, that they would use to work in Egypt and build with. So Paro says, don't continue. I guess they had a manufacturing companies that would give the Jews the bricks that were needed in order to build what they needed to build. Don't give them the bricks anymore. In order to make the bricks like the day before, to heat them up, like we were doing in the past, yesterday, the day before, like we always, as that was the setup until now. They should go themselves, be cautious and collect and find all the straw, the stubble, the straw they needed in order to make the bricks. Go and find it yourself and make it yourself. And the kicker is, and don't lessen up. I'm giving you all this extra work. You still have to produce equal. The tax is the same as before. You still have to produce. We had to produce before. Verse 8. And the number, the calculation, right? The taxes. They had the amount of production that was taxed on every person and what they had to produce. Small, shilshaim, what you were doing yesterday, the day before, all the days, tasimu aleihem, should stay the same. The tax numbers, the tax bracket, the taxes we're collecting is staying the same. This is how much you have to produce. Do not diminish from that number. They are getting relaxed. They're slacking off. You know, they're like, and that's what they're crying. We want to go, we want a holiday, we want a vacation, we want to go sacrifice to our God. They are slacking off. That's what's going on in Pharaoh says. So we got to double down, and we are going to give them more work by making them also produce the bricks and then go into the construction and use the bricks in order to build. Verse 9, make it harder for them. Double down on them. And this way you should do and don't listen to their false claims. We need a break, we need vacation, right? I guess it's like in parenting with children. You know, there's two ways to deal with it. Sometimes the kids need to get a break, sometimes they need to double down. If I was saying psychology here is that this whole complaining that's going on, you need to knock it out of them. And how are we going to do that? By doubling down on the work and making them work even harder. So the taskmasters of the people, the Jewish taskmasters, I believe is referring to here. I'm sorry, the Egyptian ones, and the Jewish one, the policemen, the Jewish taskmaster. They said to the nation, we have bad news for you. This is what Pharaoh said. I'm not giving you any more stubble, any more straw. You have to go by yourselves and find it. Wherever you'll find it, go look for it. Because we're not easing off the tax burden at all. So you're going to have to now find the work and keep on producing the same taxes that you paid till now by getting the amount of work done that we need you to do. And go quickly. And because you better really start working hard, because it's getting much harder. So the people started scattering around. Now they have to go find this stuff to make the bricks, the stubble. The kaishish kash the tevin, to look for the stubble in order to collect it and get it together in order to now burn and make the bricks. And the taskmasters were pressing them, they were squeezing them, they were forcing them. Finish. You have to finish the quota before you go home. You know, it's the end of the workday. You got to make sure the numbers come in. You got to get the right numbers. Just as when there was stubble, you have to finish the same amount. And the Egyptian officers beat the Jewish policemen. They beat them up. that they were placed to be in charge of oversee the Jewish work. The Pharaoh's taskmasters beat the Jewish policemen. Why didn't you fill up? We're looking at the quota. You didn't keep up. On your quota, the law. The law was that this is the amount of tax you need to do. That's how much you have to build. Little bank small shulshan to do like the day yesterday. You didn't finish yesterday. You didn't finish today. You guys are slacking off. You're not finishing work. And they started beating the Jewish policemen for the crime that the Jews did not keep up with their quota, even though they couldn't because they now had to do the bricks. Now Rashi says, unlike some of the stories we know with the kapos, the Jewish taskmasters, their hearts were broken. And they had rachmanis, they had pity on their fellow Jews, and they did not beat the workers. So who got beat? The Jewish policemen ended up carrying the brunt because they wouldn't beat, I guess, mercilessly the Jewish brothers and sisters who were doing the work. And they carried the burden, they carried that beating. Because of that, they're going to get a very great miracle. Later on, when Moses is going to complain to God, much later on in history, Moses is going to tell God, I don't know, much later on, a couple of years later on, that he can't handle the Jews anymore. It's too much. He needs help. So Hashem says, what I'm going to do is take 70 people next to you. It's going to be the first Supreme Court is going to be created. It's called the Sanhedrin in Hebrew. And I will move some of your holy, divine spirituality onto them. So they're going to take over and get some sense of divine prophecy. And it'll go from you onto them. Now, how did Moses choose who fit the criteria to merit such a great revelation, such a great spiritual godliness? And that's going to be the same Jews who suffered here, right? The Jewish kapos at the time in Egypt, that they suffered the burden of the Egyptian taskmasters. They were the managers. Those will be the people who will merit later on to get the level of prophecy at that time, because obviously they're very special people. Okay. Where are we here? Yeah, so they would say, why didn't you finish the thing? And then the Egyptian taskmasters, Rashi says, would beat the Jews. So the policemen of the Jewish policemen came. They came to Pharaoh. He says, Pharaoh, what are you doing to us? Why are you doing this to us? It doesn't make sense. You're not giving straw to your servants, or the bricks. So you're telling us to build ourselves. And we're end up getting beaten. And your people are sinning. It's like, it doesn't make sense. Pharaoh, what you're doing here, you're asking us to produce the same, but not giving us the material. So Pharaoh, so the policemen came with a petition. They came to a petition to Pharaoh. They got the union together, and they came to Pharaoh, and they said, Pharaoh, it's not fair. We're just getting beaten because we can't keep up the quota. So Pharaoh said the same answer. Nirpam atam nirpam. He says, you guys are just slacking off. You're being lax. Okay, not to maintain. And that's why you're coming. You're saying, let us go and bring sacrifices to God. It's because really I didn't work you hard enough. I have to work you harder because you're getting these ideas, these crazy ideas in your head, these foolish ideas that you need a break. So now, go back to your work, Jewish policemen. I'm not giving you the stubble. The same number, the same tax collection of bricks that you need to do, you have to keep on producing. And the Jewish policemen saw Oisam Bara in the terrible distress. We don't know what to tell you, the Jewish policeman said to the other Jews. You have to produce the same amount. We went to Pharaoh, I guess we spoke to him, and nothing doing. You got to keep up. And we don't know what to tell you. We're the managers to oversee you, but the work has to get done. We tried, we spoke to him, and it's terrible. We see how much suffering going on, but you guys need to produce. But Yifku as Moshe, what happens? Who meets up with Moses? As I started off the class saying, there was two troublemakers, right? Dasan and Aviram. They're the guy in the community that always has to make sure the rabbi is having a hard time. They're making sure the rabbi's life is miserable. So they come to Moses, and they meet up with Moses and Aaron. Yitzavim Lekrasam, as they came out of B'tzesim is Pharaoh. So Moses and Aaron are coming out of speaking to Pharaoh. And Dasan and Aviram come to them, and what do they tell Moses and Pharaoh? They say to Moses and Pharaoh, Yarei Hashem, God should reveal Aleichem himself to you guys. And God should judge you. What you've done, to make us look bad in Pharaoh's eyes, you hurt us. You made us look worse. In other words, we were bad enough as is, I guess. Now at least he was giving that amount of work, but now you made us look worse in his eyes. He thinks we need to work harder. In the eyes of Pharaoh and his servants, you're literally giving them a sword to kill us, Moses and Aaron. So what does Moses and Aaron do? So Moses returns to God, and he says to God, Hashem, my master, says, God, what do you want from these people? Why are you making them suffer so hard? Why are you torturing them, God? And why are you getting me involved in your business here? You'll say, and yes, now it's personal by me. Now I'm involved because you sent me to do your work and it backfired. And now the Jews are not just freed, as was the plan, but now they're suffering more because of me going on the message that you sent them. Since I came to Pharaoh's house, to Pharaoh, the Darba B'Shmecha, to speak in your name, it got worse. It's come worse. And you haven't saved the Jewish people. Not just that you haven't saved them like you promised to do, but you made it actually worse for them. So here, the last verse, God, we finished the portion. God says to Pharaoh, you will yet see what will happen. At the Sira, he says, now you will see. Very interesting. Rashi says here, Moses, another mistake that Moshe made. You're not believing in me. I told you. I guess God could even say to Moses, I told you this was going to happen. You again failed. You failed, Rashi says, because what happened by Abraham? God constantly did this to Abraham, right? Right? He'd tell him, go to Israel, and then there was a hunger there, right? He would say, Abraham, you're going to have children. Meanwhile, the guy is like 100 years old, and he finally actually has a kid, and then God says, okay, Abraham, take your child as a sacrifice. So he says, I've done this with Abraham, and he never questioned me. He never questioned God, what God wanted. And you are questioning me. I told you not to question me, and I'm going to bring it up. And therefore, since you questioned to me, you will see these miracles that will happen. But I'm going to take away from you the next miracle, which will be the Jewish people entering the land of Israel. Because of that, again, another reason, very interesting, a second reason in our parsha, why Moses didn't merit to go into Israel. A, we learned because he questioned the Jews won't believe. And B, because he's here questioning God and doesn't have the faith and trust, at least on the level like Abraham and Isaac. Okay. Because of the strong hand that was in the mouth of Biyad Chazak Yegarshem, and in a strong hand you will see the great miracles. I will take the Jews out of Israel. Don't worry, this is all pre-planned by Hashem. Again, these are all on high levels. Of course, Moshe believes in Hashem, and understand this, we'll have to spend another time. But of course, these are just reading here what Rashi is writing. All right, any questions or comments on today's Chumash? Anyone have any questions or comments? Evan, I can't hear you.
I know. I was thinking about which question to ask.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess I'll start off with the fact that why are we reading this now? And then Passover is not for a couple months.
Well, we're reading it now because we read the Torah beginning on Simchas Torah, and then we just go one portion after another.
Okay.
So it comes out in order where it is. I guess it's not all the portions are happening in order of the year, right? And we're actually going through thousands of years. We're starting from Adam and Eve. So the way the Torah is divided is just divided in the order from beginning. It's like reading a book, right? So we will celebrate Pesach at the time that Pesach actually happened to signify that time. But in reading the Torah, we're going to read it straight as it goes. So it doesn't always end up, that it happened in the time that it happened. When Pesach will come, we will read these stories on Pesach. But right now, we're just going from beginning to end of the book. That's a great question. I believe that it's just the way it's set up. It's not like instead of reading the Torah a section each time by the holiday and then read a little here, read a little there, we read from cover to cover, and it just comes out where it comes out.
Okay.
All right? It's like divided. It's kind of more or less equally divided. You know what I mean? So, yeah. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yes, you had more questions?
Yeah, maybe why did they the two Jews go to Pharaoh and complain about Moses. Did we discuss that already? Or
No, the Jews went to Pharaoh. Well, Dasan and Aviram were like two troublemakers that were always there to make trouble. I just found it interesting that it's like every shul has yeah, I saw you were laughing when I said that. You always have the guy who's trying to make trouble for the rabbi. So I think it's not unique. Even Moses had that problem. In other words, it was already. I guess maybe you're a rabbi when there's someone who's already trying to get rid of you. What did I want to say? But the policemen of the Jews went to Pharaoh to try and get him to understand that they can't produce the same quota if they have to make the bricks. And Pharaoh said no. And at that point, at least Dasan and Aviram went over to Moses, had the nerve to go over to Moses and tell him that he's the wrong guy. They didn't believe. At least those two didn't believe. So they're going there in order to have that conversation with Moses that it wasn't good what he did. It was negative. It was bad. Yeah. All right. Any other questions or comments? Or we'll move on to Tanya. All right. We'll leave the Chumash over here.